Hello, everybody. My name is Daryl Gordon, and I'm Vice President of Marketing at MediKeeper, and thank you for joining us today. A couple of quick announcements before we hand it over to our subject matter experts today, and that is that the session is being recorded. If you missed any of it, or if you'd like to share with somebody, you'll be able to find it up on our website tomorrow, as well as all the other recordings of the other great sessions that we've done. We're using Zoom today, and if you have any questions at any time, you can use the Zoom functionality that you'll find at the bottom of the screen. And lastly, and probably the most important is, this is a 25-minute session, so we may not get to all the different questions, but we promise that we will follow up with them afterwards. So today's topic is a little bit of a tongue twister: new clinically relevant wellness biometric markers. And for our session, we have two speakers. To moderate the session, introduce you to our guest speaker, it's my pleasure to introduce you to Dr. Tyler Amell, the Chief Health and Strategy Officer at MediKeeper. Dr. Amell.
Thank you very much, Daryl, and good morning, everyone. It's such a pleasure to be here today with you all and share some of our insights with regards to this important topic. This is an area that got beaten down a little bit during the pandemic for a variety of reasons, but there are some improvements that we're seeing both on the innovation side, the technology side, as well as the market rebounding rather significantly. Just prior to us starting the webinar, Heather and I were talking about the changes that we've seen in this particular space, and this is going to be quite an interesting topic for us to unpack here as we go through this. So without further delay, as is customary, these are our affiliations and disclosures. So as Daryl mentioned, I'm Tyler Amell. I'm the Chief Health and Strategy Officer at MediKeeper. I'm also on faculty at Pacific Coast University for Workplace Health Sciences, and I sit on the executive board of the National Wellness Institute as well as the Work Wellness Institute. So I wear a few different hats. My contact details are up on the screen, including my LinkedIn link. So feel free to reach out. I'd love to hear from you. I'm very active in promoting evidence-informed practice when it comes to workplace health and productivity solutions. And of course, biometrics is definitely a significant component to that. But I'm really honored today to be joined by Dr. Heather Fehling, who is from CRL, who's a partner of MediKeeper. So Heather, would you like to briefly introduce yourself?
Sure. I am Heather Fehling, Chief Scientific Officer at CRL. Been with the company now 15 years, and I oversee science and innovation here.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Appreciate that. And Heather's contact details are up on the screen as well. So this is part of a series of webinars that MediKeeper hosts, usually about on a monthly basis. We try to get to them pretty frequently. This is and we put a lot of thought and effort into it, and of course we respond to people's requests for topics as well. So if you have an idea for a webinar where you want us to pack the science behind it, the evidence, and perhaps the return on investment, value on investment sort of angles, feel free to send a note to Daryl or I, and we'd be more than happy to consider it and build a webinar around that. So in terms of what I've been up to lately, it's been a really busy conference season, to be honest. We did an employer webinar in June on understanding the wellness biometric markers. That's available on the MediKeeper website. I believe it is. If not, I can give you a synopsis and summary of that. I gave a talk for IFEBP, which is the International Foundation of Employee Benefit Plans, on the 4-day work week, which was very well attended. That was a great conference. I also gave the keynote in Seattle at the IFEBP CEBS event. So that's a Certified Employee Benefit Specialist. So that was the symposium in Seattle. This one was on the future of healthcare and increased longevity and what we can do from a control and prevention perspective to increase our lifespan and our health span, of course, directly tied to well-being and wellness initiatives. So we're quite pleased with that. And then I was in Ohio to speak on artificial intelligence and data analytics and machine learning and these sort of things and how they apply to wellness and well-being. Then I did a session called Your Health is Your Wealth, looking at a deep dive on a workshop. And today is our next generation biometrics webinar, which is something we're quite pleased to be discussing. And then also later on this morning, I'll be speaking at the National Workers' Comp and Disability Conference here in Vegas on behavior change and how that can impact significant workplace injuries and illnesses. So I must apologize. I have a makeshift studio in my hotel room here at the Mandalay Bay. So the lighting isn't the best. I'm partially partially blind right now, but hopefully that'll work out well in the end. And coming up next week, hopefully some of you will be able to join us in San Diego for the WELCOA Summit. I'm giving a session on the science behind behavior change. So this is going to be a very interesting state-of-the-art presentation on where we're at with regards to how do we support people on their health improvement journey by sustaining their behavior change adventures. So with that being said, let's dive into today's content. So first up, from a delivery perspective, is what is the current state of biometric markers? Is the market ready for disruption? Heather and I certainly believe that it is, and she's going to talk about that. Next up is what new technologies are available to facilitate the wellness program adoption. So this goes from collection devices through on to the wellness biometric markers, and how an offering as not necessarily old, but as well used as it is currently, where can we move the needle? How can we improve this from a lab verified perspective versus an older way of collecting data via self-report, and then adding these together, and perhaps even layering in some wearable type data to get a true 360-degree profile and view of people's health, so that they know where they're at, and you can measure success, you can measure outcomes from that perspective. And then really, how do these technologies disrupt the current wellness program model, which hopefully, if you've got any questions in that space, please feel free to send them to Daryl in the chat. There's some neat things there. So so Heather, I'd like to just do a first blush here, high level. We've got 3 deliverables for the audience today. Maybe a few perspectives from your side on each one before we get into the current state.
Sure. Yes. I mean, I'm very excited about all of the technologies that are coming up to really help us move the needle on wellness programs, get people to participate, and really, get to the heart of issues that folks might be facing, and get early intervention to keep folks healthier and live those nice long health spans.
Excellent. Thank you. So let's unpack the current state. So would you like to walk the audience through?
Sure. So if an employee is interested in exploring their wellness, currently there are 2 traditional models. So one of which is folks make an appointment with their physician. They go in for a wellness exam, and either in the clinic or at a patient service center, they have a blood draw by a professional phlebotomist. So the great thing about this is it's personalized to the employee with their physician under that relationship. But the downside is it does take the employee out of work in order to make those appointments for both the initial visit as well as the follow-up visit to go through the results, which results in some lost productivity for that employee and thus the employer. So if employees are lucky enough, their employer participates in an employer-based wellness screen program. As we talked about before the webinar began, a lot of employers are doing away with this just based on folks working off-site and things of that nature, and the cost of these programs. But if someone does have access to one, typically what you see is a once-a-year on-site blood draw by a professional phlebotomy group. And the great thing is it's convenient. It's typically at the place of work or somewhere nearby for the employees. But the drawback is there isn't that patient-doctor relationship, and it's just a general wellness screen. So it's a pretty limited test panel there. So ripe for some improvement.
Yes, indeed. Now, what are your thoughts? Some organizations that I know of tie the phlebotomy or the blood draw with real-time analytics, and then an opportunity for coaching right there. So similar to what you see in a physician's office, where you have that sort of relationship in place, but you may not necessarily get it in real time, and you'd have to go for a subsequent visit, as you mentioned.
Right.
Now, from an on-site perspective, what are your thoughts on that real-time approach, and then incorporating in some coaching elements, health coaching elements in place to really capitalize on that moment then and there with the patient or with the worker who may be in need of convincing that they actually need to make some improvements in their health based upon the outcome of the biometric markers that are available to be read in real time, because not all of them can be, right? So if you can unpack that,
Right.
that'd be really good.
Sure, and I think that is an excellent way to get in front of people and to hopefully get them to take some action. They can oftentimes use cholestic instruments, get some basic readings. And if some of those are off, hopefully that encourages a person that, hey, here's some data in front of me. Here's someone coaching me. I do have an issue. And with that encouragement, hopefully they go see their physician for follow-up and some, broader panels of tests to really unpack what's going on there.
Okay, makes sense. Right, so let's talk about the collection process as it exists right now, and maybe highlight some room for improvement here.
Right, and currently, as I mentioned, most of this is done by your traditional phlebotomy, which some folks have a fear of needles, so I know a lot of people who don't participate because of that. Which I don't blame them. But as you can see here, there is a whole host of other options available, and we're seeing a growth in this area of technology in part because of the pandemic. Folks are getting accustomed to collecting their own samples at home. So we're really seeing this explosion of options here. And I wanted to dive into a few of these, and you can group them in two major categories. On the left-hand side of the screen, or at least for me, it's the left-hand side, we have our dried blood spot devices. And then on the right-hand side, we have our wet blood devices. And so I'm going to go through each of these just in a little bit of detail. And I know many of you are probably familiar with the Whatman 903 card. That one is here at the top with the 5 circles. That's been around, believe it or not, since 1982. So definitely, I know, it's amazing. It's been around that long. But it's not only used in infant heel sticks, but it's being used now by some of these direct-to-consumer testing companies. So folks can do a finger prick and drop blood, in each of these circles, mail it in for some analysis. And there's another card I wanted to highlight here, and this is called the ADX or Advanced DX 100 card. This is similar. I mean, it's a dry blood spot card. I've got one here, which you probably can't see very well, but basically what you do is you drop the blood in the main made square here, and that's where you drop your whole blood. It's 4 drops, which is about 200 microliters. And then it has technology that allows for the separation of the plasma from the whole blood, and that comes off to that longer window there, that longer rectangle. And so it enables us to kind of purify away those red blood cells and any potential interference, and allows us to then have some options for our plasma and serum based assays in the lab, so we can punch from that longer portion of the card and get a closer correlation between a venipuncture sample and a dried blood spot sample. So it increases the quality really of this. The downside I would say is that after folks drop their sample, they have to lay the card out for half an hour for it to dry before they can put it in the packaging and mail it back. But it's a nice solution. We validate a lot of tests on it and found that it does pretty closely correlate with venipuncture. And as well, we get 30-day stability on the majority of the analytes we've validated there. So that's great for folks who collect and then forget to mail it in, which does happen.
It certainly does. And that's the approach that MediKeeper actually uses for our own staff, as we go through a dried blood collection process as part of our own wellness initiative, because MediKeeper staff do use the MediKeeper platform. We go through this process. We actually use you as our lab partner
Yeah.
and send these things. So absolutely, this is quite meaningful, I think, for a lot of folks on the call. And it's great to hear that there is a lot of validity tied to these types of instruments, because that's always a question, because we're looking for lab verified data to solidify outcomes here that are not essentially based upon self-report, as I mentioned earlier. So this does add a lot of credibility to these results, so that you can incentivize and you can drive programming from this perspective as well.
Oh, exactly. Yes, and there are some other devices here. There's the HemaSpot device, which is similar to the Advanced DX card. It's just in a little clamshell, and basically you drop the blood in the center, and it has almost like a little spiral that will, the blood travels along and it separates out the plasma there. The advantage to this one is that you don't have to dry it for 30 minutes. You just close the clamshell and you can mail it. So that's another similar device. And then the one at the top in the purple case is one that's called the Mitra by Neoterix, and it collects whole blood and dries it. But the difference with this little device, and they look like little Q-tips, they're kind of neat looking. But the difference here is that it actually collects a fixed volume of blood. So it has 3 different flavors of the device, one that collects 10 microliters, 20, and 30 microliters. So you basically do your finger prick and hold the Q-tip to your finger, and it will collect exactly 10, 20, or 30 microliters. And then you keep going down the line of Q-tips so that you can collect up to, say, 120 microliters, and then close it up and mail it to the lab. So yeah, those are pretty nifty technologies. We're seeing advancement there, so we continue to keep our eye on that particular space. And then the other one I wanted to highlight, which is moving quickly, is the liquid blood side of the house. And some of you have probably seen just your standard BD microtainer, which has been around quite some time. And some of our direct-to-consumer companies we see in the marketplace, they allow their consumers to just prick their finger with a standard lancet, collect into that BD microtainer. So we see a lot of that, but folks don't tend to like finger pricks. So these next gen devices are displayed here. One of them is the Tasso device. And this particular device, it's a lancet. It has 510K clearance. And the beauty of it, it is compatible with that BD microtainer. So you actually just slide the microtainer on that Tasso device. And then it has an adhesive sticker on the back of it that you just peel off. And then it affixes to the side of the arm. So the person can do this very easily themselves. The first, of course, they have to warm it up just a little bit, and then wipe it with alcohol and then stick this on. And once they're ready, they just depress that red button. And within 2 to 5 minutes, they collect 400 to 500 microliters of whole blood. And it's compatible with the different BD microtainers of different anticoagulants. You know, the variety of tests that you can perform with this is pretty impressive. So yeah, we've done a lot of studies with this device, and it has a very nice user experience profile. When you look at people's pain level with this type of device versus a finger stick, it's much different. So on a scale of 0 to 10, people rate this device as like a 1 or a 2, whereas a finger stick tends to be between a 6 and an 8 in terms of pain level. And you know, over 95%, 98%, even in some studies of people participating, said they would do it again and recommend it to somebody.
Oh, that's
So
really good to hear. And of
yeah,
course, you know, looking at normal venipuncture
yes,
as another scale, because you know the as you pointed out, the needles tend to scare a few folks off in that respect. So I know when you and I were prepping, you brought up the question that somebody asked you in a recent webinar around how does this compare to a mosquito bite? So it'd be great to hear your thoughts on that.
Yes, and this is such a fun question, and it was pertaining to the second device here, which is the Tap Micro, which is very similar. It's a lancet. It's by a company called Your Bio Health, and this particular one, instead of like the lancet that the Tasso device has, that just comes and does a single nick, this one has 30 microneedles that are less than the diameter of an eyelash. And so someone asked, you know, is this worse than a mosquito bite? And it's actually not. I mean, of course, you know, the mosquito bite, we react to the mosquito saliva, so that's partly why you have the itch and the, you know, part of the sting. But when the mosquito bites you, its little proboscis goes in. I had to brush up on biology, about 2 millimeters to 3 millimeters. And this particular device, its little microneedles only go down to 1 millimeter. So less than a mosquito bite, which is always
Excellent.
encouraging.
Yes, of course. Now, on the mosquito side, of course, there are anticoagulants in place, and there is a little bit of
Yes,
anesthetic in there so that you don't feel it and swat the mosquito. So
right.
there's a few other reasons as to why this is a
Yeah,
little bit better.
yeah.
So I'm just wondering, you know, let's talk about some of the tests that are very common from a wellness perspective, you know, as we move into the last couple of slides here and touch on the important elements of today's presentation.
Yes, and we have validated over 50 different biomarkers, and here I've just kind of lumped them into some categories. This doesn't cover the full spectrum of what we've validated, but just wanted to highlight, we've got a cardiac biomarker panel. We've got some of your standard lipids listed there, and then we get into some more advanced cardiac biomarkers like NT-proBNP that looks at inflammation around the heart. ApoA1, ApoB, lipoprotein A is one that's been in the literature quite a bit, but is kind of getting a resurgence in the literature because there are some drugs in development that now target Lp(a), like by Eli Lilly. And this is an interesting marker because it has a very strong genetic component. So people will, because of their genetics, have an Lp(a) that is elevated. And in some instances, their standard lipids are normal. So they have an increased risk of, cardiovascular disease and stroke that is hidden from your standard panel. So these are very important biomarkers to test and to make available to people. Also, we've got thyroid biomarkers. Hormones have been extremely popular with these technologies, the liquid blood technologies that utilize that microtainer. We have a lot of folks interested in measuring testosterone, and varying levels of hormones at an initial stage to see if they should get on like a hormone replacement therapy. And then once they're on a hormone replacement therapy, to then monitor it. So very popular consumer sort of an application there. And then vitamins have been of strong interest to people just wanting to even add those on to wellness panels. Vitamin D, B12 being our most popular. And then we have other standard markers in the kidney and liver space, as well as A1C, PSA, which are not on here, COVID antibodies, and things of that nature. So we've done a lot of validation studies with these, and what is so nice about the liquid blood is the quality of it. And, DBS, while that is a great technology, when you look at liquid blood and you correlate it to your standard venipuncture, it does correlate more closely, a very tight correlation there. So you're getting, a lab grade test run and then a very high sample quality. So it's terrific. And then because of the sample volume being, 400 to 600 microliters, you can get more analytes off of that one sample compared to a DBS. So we can get 10 to 12 analytes depending on which ones are selected versus say 6 to 8 on a DBS card.
Right. So, higher volume, less pain, greater test responsiveness, greater number of tests, and of course, very strong validity and reliability, which is the
Right.
cornerstone of a lot of these outcomes. So that's really good to hear.
Yeah.
Sounds like a good sales job from your perspective on getting people to consider this sort of approach. But let's go
Yes.
beyond this. Let's talk about some other innovations.
Absolutely. So as you all know, AI is constantly in the news. So I wanted to highlight a few technologies that involve AI that are very specific to the wellness space and are readily available now. So the first of which I wanted to talk about is Sanguina. This is a 510K cleared mobile app, and it's called the Anemo Check. And basically, how they describe it is it's a fingernail selfie. And it's very powerful because it looks at iron deficiency. And that is the most common nutritional deficiency in the US, with about 10 million people deficient and 5 million people who have anemia. And how this app works is you just use your cell phone camera, take a picture of your nails, and then you highlight the middle of your fingernail. And what the app is doing is it's looking at the paleness of your fingernail bed in order to estimate hemoglobin. And then it can help really screen people at a high level, particularly people who might suffer from anemia, to see if they have an issue with a goal of them then visiting their physician if something's identified so they could have a standard blood draw and take some action there. So handy app. So another one I want to highlight is the Anura app by a company out of Canada called Neurologics. And these types of apps, as well as like the Bina app here, they use what's called transdermal imaging technology that leverages the camera and your cell phone to extract facial blood flow information. So it's pretty cool. You just hold the phone and it's taking a video selfie for about 30 seconds, and it's identifying regions of interest, extracting blood flow information, and then it can estimate your heart rate, blood pressure, if you have an irregular heartbeat. It even estimates your mental stress index. And then it will report out information on risk of cardiovascular disease, heart attack, stroke, type 2 diabetes, and even some blood biomarkers. So it will tell you your risk of having an A1C level above 5.7% or a fasting glucose level that's off. One of the other fun things it reports on is facial skin age, which people either love or they hate, depending on their result. But and Bean is very similar. You know, you take that video selfie, and it can report out on a number of metrics listed there, including a wellness score. And CRL, we have done some studies on these two apps in particular. We leveraged our employee wellness draw and had folks volunteer when they were coming in for their draw. And we would have them do their standard blood pressure cuff and venipuncture for their normal biomarkers. And then we did these apps and you know, correlated them. And we found that the blood pressure using these apps ranged, you know, especially like systolic, there was a 0% variance between what the app reported and and what we found on the blood pressure cuff. And then as you got up into the biomarkers, there was about a 10% variance. So these technologies are coming a long way.
Absolutely. It's wonderful to see. And it's great to see, you know, what the future is going to hold with regards to this, because, you know, there's so many new developments taking place every day. So let's talk about that briefly as we bring to a close. You know, let's share some of your thoughts on the future state of wellness biomarkers and collection processes, and really how organizations can truly leverage biometrics and take it to the next level.
Absolutely. And I think where we're going to, and we're already starting to head this way, is folks are wanting at-home sampling, and employers are getting interested in this because it gets more people participating in these wellness programs. So I think we're going to see more people taking their own samples and sending them into the lab for a high quality analysis. And, you know, if that's not even possible, if cost is is a concern, you know, employers can then look to use those AI assisted tools and maybe have people do a facial scan and triage them. And if they see something that's off, then they could send in the blood sampling device for that lab-based testing. And then I think, you know, we didn't get into this, but that'd be a whole other webinar on wearables. So that technology has advanced greatly. And what's wonderful about all of this is it's going to allow people that longitudinal tracking, because when you have an event once a year, you have 2 points and you say, here's year 1, here's year 2, and you kind of think, okay, I'm about here in terms of my health, but what's going on in between those 2 points in time, and how can we better improve somebody's health? And I think as we see greater adoption of these, we'll see coverage by health savings plans, and hopefully identifying conditions and diseases earlier to keep our employee population healthier.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, and that's a great idea for wearables. I myself have done a fair bit of research on the accuracy of wearables and utilization or supporting behavior change initiatives. So I think that's a really good one. So Daryl, let's make note of that. So with that being said, Dr. Heather Fehling, thank you so much for joining us here today. Really appreciate your time. I'm sure there's been a fair number of questions that have been posed to Daryl. I believe we're almost up on time, but I'll turn it over to Daryl to wrap things up.
All right. There are questions, and my apologies are going to go to Michael and everybody else, because we will follow up with you, but we always are so prompt about ending on time to make sure everyone gets to their next meetings. So as always, keep on saying this, is an hour would be better because there's so much content. So Dr. Heather, thank you for joining us. Dr. Tyler, thank you for some great content. This will be posted on our website, and we hope you will join us next month. We've got a couple of great sessions still coming up before we head out through the year. I hope everyone has a great day. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you all.
Thank you.